Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen, an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos weekly, usually for a couple of different reasons. There is a bug flying around behind me. That is weird, but I saw its reflection a couple of times, and now I don't know where it went. That's creepy. But hey, there it was again. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't care. But hey, we have 25 seconds of me freaking out just a little bit at the beginning of this video, and that's all right. Getting back to it. My name is Scott Dalen, an ELCA pastor from Southwest Iowa, and I present these Sermon Brain Dump videos for a couple of different reasons every week. The first of which is just to take my brain out of the mode of working with, seriously, I can see it flying all over the place. This is weird. To take my, sorry, weirdness today. To take my brain out of the mode of working with the gospel text and into the mode of actually writing and preparing the sermon that I'll preach to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first reason. And then the second is just to allow you, the viewer, who've come across this video for whatever reason, to gain some different insight into the biblical text or the gospel text for the week. That's why I do these. Now, this week is a little out of the ordinary. I'm actually not preaching within my congregation, because we have a guest preacher coming in. I'll still be here for the weekend, but I am not preaching. So for that, my sermon prep this week has been a little bit different. However, I am still preaching in a smaller capacity, more of a reflection, devotional type capacity within one of our local nursing homes this weekend. So I'm not prepping a sermon, and I'm still prepping a sermon, kind of sort of both. All of that being said, this week I haven't done as much of the sermon prep background work as I normally do, but still want to share just some thoughts about the gospel text as per normal. This particular Sunday, which is March 6th, 2016, the fourth Sunday of Lent, our gospel text comes from Luke chapter 15, verses 1 through 3, and then 11b through 32. Now, this is a pretty well-known story. It's commonly known as the parable of the Prodigal Son. And although I don't like that name of it, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So all of that being said, how about we jump into this bad boy? Now, all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him being Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." Okay, that's kind of the brief intro, and then we'll get into the parable itself. So this is the situation. Jesus is hanging out with the undesirables, those who the religious elite say, well, they're sinful, they're not okay, the tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus hangs out with them. Jesus shares a meal with them. Jesus shares time with them and invites them in to be in relationship with one another. And so that's the whole premise for this deal. Now, in the break between verse 3 and then verse 11, there's two other very short parables that are matched up with this. One is the parable of the shepherd with the lost sheep, and he leaves the 99 and he goes to find the lost one, and when he finds it, he brings it home and has a party because what was lost was found. And then next is the woman who's got 10 coins and she loses one in her house, so she lights a lamp and she searches and searches and searches until she finds it. Excuse me. And when she finds it, she throws a party to celebrate, and then we come into now the parable of the prodigal. It is the same or a similar situation, that something gets lost, and when it is found again, there is a celebration. So that's kind of what's going on here, and Jesus is aiming this at the notion of that there is great celebration in the lost being found, and if the lost happens to be a sinner, then woohoo, let's have a party because they've come back, and the religious elite should be the first ones to celebrate that. So that's kind of what the point of this parable is. But now let's get into it. And it's kind of lengthy, so I'll probably break it down into sections, kind of like I normally do. So having had that grumbling against him, he told them this parable. There was a man who had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property among them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in desolate living. Okay, I'm going to stop for just a second. So what's going on here is he's got two sons, and they will both inherit something, but it's the older son, being the older one, being the quote unquote heir. He will get the larger portion. Typically, in a situation like this, he would get 2/3 of the inheritance, and the younger son would get 1/3 of the inheritance. But as per usual, when you inherit something, when the parent or the individual who has willed it to you, when they die. So by saying this now, essentially the younger son is telling his father, "You are dead to me. You are worth nothing more to me than what you can give me. So give it to me now, and I'm going to go off on my own." So that's what he does, and the father agrees to it. Painful as that must have been for him, he gives him his inheritance, and then soon after that, the younger son goes off, and he squanders it. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. All right, I'm going to stop again. This is kind of this shows the extreme nature of how desperate the younger son has now become. Being a Jewish person, he wouldn't be around pigs. Pigs were considered to be unclean. He would never, to be around them even could make him unclean. He would never, of course, eat pork. But he desires to have the food that's being given to the livestock. That's how hungry he is. He has nothing, literally nothing, and he's just sent out to feed them, and yet is given no supplies beyond that. So that's kind of where he's at. He's literally starving to death, and that's the point he's at. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands." So he set off and went to his father. Okay, so he's gone full circle now. He's hit rock bottom, as oftentimes we tend to say, that he's become destitute. He's reached the point where his pride is gone. His well, whatever you want to call it, pride's probably the best word. His pride's gone. But he realizes and he remembers back and he says, "Well, my father, who apparently is quite rich because he has a bunch of servants, says they all had plenty, more than they needed. So I'm going to go work for my dad. I've burned the bridge in terms of being, accepted back into the family, but at least I can go work for him, and will, not be starving. It may not be great, but it's better than what I have now." So that's what he decides to do. He's going to return to the house of his father, even if his status there has been greatly diminished. So yeah, he's used to be up here, now he's way down here, and he knows it. And that's an important aspect of repentance, is recognizing the truth of the state that we're in. That's kind of what's going on here. Okay, so he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his slaves, "Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. All right, I'm going to stop there too. There's still another portion yet, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so the father's apparently watching for him. And when he sees his son coming, he recognizes him and he runs to him. Now, this is an important point. The older an individual got within the Jewish culture, and particularly men, the more regal, essentially, they became. The richer you were, the higher your status, the longer your robes would get. And that's kind of a hint of something too. But you would never run. You moved very slowly, very gracefully. And so for him to pick up his robes and run to his son indicates he's throwing everything out the window. He doesn't care. He doesn't care how it looks. He's going to greet the son that had been lost to him. And that's worth that's worth celebrating, as we see. Now, the son tells him, I've sinned against God and against you. I'm not worthy to be called your son. But can I work for you? And all is forgiven. The father forgives him the slight against him that had happened before when he basically said, hey, you're dead, give me my money. He says, put the robe on him, bring out the best robe, which would have been his robe, and put it on the son, put the ring on his finger. That's the symbol of the house. It's essentially reinstate him at the height of his status. He is among the best again. And they go and they have a celebration. Now, just like those other two short parables that I mentioned before, his son is of great worth to him. And just like the shepherd went and found the sheep and had a party, and the woman found her coin and had a party, now he finds his son and has a party, because what is lost is found of great value. So that all of that is happening, and the father has forgiven this slight against him. Now things continue. Because remember, there's two sons. Now the elder brother was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has gotten him back safe and sound. But he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you. I've never disobeyed your command, and yet you never even given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Then the father said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. All right, now that's finally the end of the story. It's a pretty lengthy one. So we've got this older brother who is the heir, who has stayed around, has worked for his father, has always done what was expected of him, has always followed the rules. And now that younger brother, who was a screw up, is back and they're having a party, he's ticked off about it. Now, at first glance, maybe this seems understandable. But I really think that this older brother character within the parable, and remember this is a parable that Jesus is telling, is a shot at those religious leaders who were grumbling against him because he was taking the time to eat and be in a relationship and celebrate with the people they considered to be sinners. All too often, Jesus is criticized for not following the rules, for rewriting the rules, for setting the rules straight, or which he was entitled to. He was God, for Pete's sake. He could do that. But he's criticized for it because in their minds, surely if this guy is who he says he is, he would understand that our rules are right. This is the way it has to be. Well, Jesus basically says no. So the older brother in the story is perhaps understandably justified in his anger towards his younger brother, because you got to think about what this has cost him. Yes, he's followed the rules. He's stayed around. He's done the work, feeling that he's been and he hasn't been recognized for it. He hasn't been rewarded for that. But he's always done what he's wanted. But when the younger brother takes the inheritance, that his father has to sell some stuff in order to give it to him. So that lessens the property, lessens the overarching value of the inheritance that the father still has. So now the older brother's inheritance, once younger brother comes back, is now lessened again because younger brother is reinstated back into the household. So he basically becomes an heir again. And the smaller value of the father's holdings will now be divided again. It'll still be 2/3 of what was left. So 2/3 of the original 2/3 will go to older brother, and 1/3 of the original 2/3, that's a lot of fractions, will go to younger brother now. So he's ticked off about that, but mainly he's mad because younger brother went off and wasted everything. And when he comes back, they have a celebration for him, basically celebrating that he's back. And older brother thinks that's unfair. What's interesting about this, and what I'm more drawn to within this story, and if you remember back at the beginning, I said They call this the parable of the prodigal son, and that's the worst name you could possibly have. It should be called the parable of the loving father, because the father goes to where his sons are. When younger brother is coming back, dad sees him and runs out and meets him there on the road and welcomes him back in, tries to bring him back into the household, back into the relationship, back into the celebration. When older brother's out in the field and refuses to come in, dad goes out there too. Dad would not go to the field. That's what he has servants for. But he goes out to the field. He meets him there, tries to bring him in too. And what's funny or interesting is we don't know what happens to the older brother. Jesus just kind of stops the story, and we don't know. But the loving father, who I think is God, or the love of God represented in Jesus or made manifest in Jesus, is that invitation to bring us all back in. We are all, at one time or another, we are the one who is lost. We are the younger brother, or we are the coin, or we are the lost sheep. But we are also oftentimes the older brother, the one passing judgment, the one who thinks, well, I've done everything correctly. Why are you rewarding him? And we can fall into that trap too. And oftentimes, I think we probably flip back and forth. We're one perhaps at one time, and we're another at another time, and that's our human nature. We tend to try and pass judgment, whether we want to or not. We do it anyway. And so we find ourselves falling into both traps. And I think that's really what this parable is about. That none of us are completely innocent, and none of us are completely to blame. And yet, regardless of our situation, God will come to find us. That's what Jesus did. That was God coming into our reality in order to find us who are lost. Cue up Amazing Grace right now. So that's kind of what this whole parable is about. And the cause for celebration when one who is lost has been found. And that's what the whole party is about in this one, and then in the other two short parables as well. That when something of value is lost and is now found again, it's worth celebrating. And God considers us to be of great value. So that's what's happening in this gospel. I really enjoyed this parable. It's lengthy for one hand, on one hand, so that makes it cause to have quite a bit going on in there. But there is a lot that's happening in here, and it's an important reminder for us to seek forgiveness when we find ourselves at rock bottom, and to come before our Father, to be welcomed back in, but also to remember that when we think we're following all the rules and we've got it together, and somebody else maybe isn't worthy of the mercy, that we're falling in that judgment category, and we're the older brother, and yet God welcomes us back into. So that's kind of what's happening. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, by all means share those down in the comment section. We'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, I hope you have a blessed week, and God bless.